Good afternoon, Dana. How are you?
Oh, I'm hanging around. How are you doing?
Doing okay. Odd time we're living in, but
Yes.
great that we can get together in this way, so we can introduce you to other fellows across the country. So I'm going to jump right in and ask you a few questions so that they can get to know you this month. What do you enjoy most about practicing family law?
Uh, I, you know, I, I don't, I, like a lot of lawyers my age, I started in a firm and I did jury trials and product liability and all kinds of different things. And one of the really amazing parts as I started to do family law 37 or 8 years ago was the lawyers were incredibly um, gifted at so many different things. And the level of practice was really very high, and that was before it was really a specialty.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but you know, as I got to know a lot of lawyers and then lawyers around the country, to do this kind of work and be able to absorb it and be able to help people took a whole other set of skill sets than it did to do a personal injury or a product liability
Mm-hmm.
case. And it hasn't really changed over all these years. I've always been incredibly impressed with the um, creativity and intellectual interest of family law lawyers as the law develops. I mean, in the 80s, we were just getting into equitable distribution or best
Yeah.
interests of the children and all of that. And to this day, it's still the most gifted and um, talented and inquisitive group of lawyers that I've ever met in any profession in all my travels.
Well, that's incredible. I would also like for people to hear from you about, in light of all of that, that you love so much about family law, what do you think makes for a successful, great family lawyer? What have you sort of found over the years in your 37 plus years of practice?
Yeah, and that's one of those reflective questions because I was 24 when I got out of law school and 25 when I got sworn into the bar. And um, people always talk about the good old days, but it really wasn't. Trial work back in those days was pretty bare knuckle, and the
Mm-hmm.
old timers were tough. And
Yeah.
um, and going into family law for me actually started with working in domestic violence, which was not something at 25 or 26 years old, I had any idea. You try to sit at your chair and look like you're reasonably competent when clients are presented to you. Um,
Right.
but I think that what I learned from that was that it took a temperament. And I know people would say intellect, it certainly takes that because you have to be so creative in so many different ways in so many different cases and
Mm-hmm.
understand all those variables. But, it wasn't a place where a good lawyer was going to be able to yell and scream to get what they want or bully. And the other shift for that was I realized that the great trial lawyers understood that a bench trial is not a jury trial.
Mm-hmm.
You have an audience of one. And I started doing jury trials. And so when you make that transition, you're not just trying the case for the client. There's that one person audience. And what I saw in the great trial lawyers who both did jury trials and non-jury trials was this incredible ability to be a chameleon,
Yeah.
to read the audience and understand what was in front of them, and then be able to do what you had to do, which was package the case, stick to the theme, and not get in somebody else's sandbox. And so the great lawyers that I've met could do a deposition in 2 hours, could eviscerate an expert witness in an hour, and would do it with a smile. And so I came to realize that being nice to people and temperament along with that, and we all have our moments. We all have them. You probably never have, but some of us have.
Never, never, no.
And you, no, not one of those. But I realized that the great lawyers totally got the temperature in the room and the audience, and that the person they were convincing, they didn't need to convince them 100%. You needed to get to 60%.
Mm-hmm.
And then the truth sort of won out after that. And I was very fortunate. I saw some incredibly talented trial lawyers, but that was probably their greatest gift from my perspective: temperament.
Yeah. Awesome. And I would wonder what would you say from all those talented lawyers you've observed or worked with through the years was the best advice you've been given? Is there
Well,
one thing or multiple things you could share with us?
so some of those stories probably wouldn't be good for the video, because some of our colleagues could be a little risque in some of the comments that would get made. Actually, as a young lawyer, the great piece of advice I got was from a trial judge, one of the really great trial judges I ever appeared in front of. It was one of my first family law cases, and he called me into chambers because he was irritated with something I had done, which was a fairly long list in my youth. And he said to me about this family, and this is not a specialty yet. Judges weren't just doing family court stuff, they were trial judges. And he said, I can do this with a hatchet, or you can do it with a scalpel. And that advice, that's 30 something years ago, that advice really stuck with me, because what he was saying over and over again in family law was, you can be incredibly creative. Judges will sign off on virtually anything that gets a case done that they don't have to decide a divorce or family law matter. As one other judge said to me, I'll sign a turnip if you give it to me and I don't have to hear the case. But that we could be very creative. Judges would approve of that and cooperate and assist us with it. But that the law was really a hatchet in family law. Equitable distribution, best interest. You hear a case for a day, 3 hours. You may get half of it right, you may get less of it right, but you're going to make the decision. That piece of advice is one I've shared, and I think made a big difference. From great trial lawyers and colleagues of mine, who then became, judges and talked about the different view from the bench. I think a lot of that advice was always about the collegial part. I think that's really hard to maintain today. And I don't say that lightly. I think for your generation of lawyers, particularly, we knew the judges through jury trials and conferences and meetings and dinners. And this is before COVID, but COVID hasn't made this any easier, was that you had to do the trial, shake hands before, shake hands afterward, and be able to move on. And one trial lawyer, after I lost a particularly big case badly, not a family matter, but I get buried, and I was sulking, and he was from an insurance defense firm, and he said, here's the deal in my firm. After you try a case, you can't come to the office for 24 hours. Go home, sulk, engage in whatever other unhealthy activities you may want to engage in, and be back at the office for 9. But he always forbid his young lawyers after a trial from being around. And then you buck up and come in and do it again. And that, I got that advice a long time ago. I still follow it. It's harder to do today with calendars the way they are, and the computers and texting, but I always thought that was great advice.
Certainly is.
Don't bring your staff down. It wasn't their fault.
Right. Well, how do you, Dana, treat yourself these days? I
think that everybody's different, in that people have hobbies and activities and things like that. For me, I always enjoyed the travel part, and have missed that the most. Again, with the International Academy, the American Academy, it's just great people and great lawyers, and you get to know spouses and families and kids, and so that part kind of got lost in the shuffle. I do a fair amount of writing. A colleague of mine very graciously once introduced me as, nobody has written so much and read so little. So I caught up on some of that that I was working on. But Zoom's an interesting thing, because now with time zones, I'd be sitting someplace in a restaurant in some country or place with my colleagues. Now we have to figure out who has the least worst time. And so on the East Coast, I'm on calls at 10 o'clock at night because of Zoom. So I think right now it's my grandfather said, everything in moderation. I think we're just trying to get through this, maintain our sanity with our families and friends and colleagues, and wait for the fall. Of course, it's summer in Maine is coming, so I'm going to be buying a lot of lobster for a lot of colleagues. So
Oh, that's beautiful. I hope to be one of them. I love it. So, I guess I can assume the first activity you're looking forward to once we get to sort of post-pandemic and safer in the world is travel again, all over.
Yeah, I
Or,
think you get to, the Journal for the American Academy is still the coolest thing I've ever participated in my career, but seeing everybody live and having dinner is part of what lawyers do really well, and
mhm,
so getting back to that will be a blast, and I think everybody's really waiting to see that again. The American Academy is different than a lot of organizations in that it's very family oriented. I mean, people have
mhm,
traveled with their kids and families for 30 or 40 years. I mean, I've been a fellow since 1990, and you see people as their kids grow and
grow
their
up.
grandchildren. It's a very welcoming place for that. And I don't say that just because we're doing this interview. When you look at the
Mhm,
American Academy compared to other places where people fly in, fly out, there's folks who've been traveling with each other for 30, 40,
mhm.
50 years. And, everybody is always happy to have kids around. And it's
Yeah.
really a very neat thing that way.
Yeah, it's beautiful. So I'm curious to know, and I'm sure all those who will be listening and hopefully viewing this video want to know who or what inspired you to become a fellow of the Academy in the 90s.
So so back then, I think the rule is still the same. You had to be in practice for 10 years.
Hmm.
And I was only in for 7. And Ed Malick from Boston, Eddie was of that generation of Boston lawyers back then. He came out of Monroe Inker's firm, and there's so many who are still fellows in the Academy. And the Boston chapter, that generation of lawyers, has always been very kind and gracious to me, very welcoming actually to the other chapters at their meetings and the like. But Ed was one of these classy, distinguished men who served in Vietnam as an officer and flew helicopters. That generation of men and women who came out of service, and and he called me up, and they didn't have any. This is a true story actually, but he called me up, and they didn't have any fellows in Maine, and they wanted to get to all of the states. So I've
Hmm.
always learned that it's really good to join a club when nobody else is in yet.
He shot of the video.
But Ed was very kind to offer. But when I went to my first meeting in Chicago, um, I saw all these like people I'd read about and seen, and the level of intellect and ability was just extraordinary. And again, the chapters have always been really welcoming. And the Boston chapter for me was always a kind of a second home. And in fact, when Ed passed away right at the time of COVID, the Boston, the Mass chapter did a ceremony for his family. One of the things lawyers do really amazingly well is to honor um, each other. It's very different than a lot of other professions that way. So the Academy's been kind of a second home that way. But Ed was the absolute pillar of what it meant to be a gentleman and a trial lawyer.
That's beautiful.
He was of counsel to my firm in Maine and me to his firm in Massachusetts for 30 something years. Fantastic. He retired.
Wow. Wow. Beautiful. So I guess the last question I would have for you is tell us a little bit about you and what unique sort of traits or things you bring to the Academy. What can we look forward to in years to come, and seeing you at different events for all those who are listening?
Well, I don't know how to answer that one. I wear a lot of different hats. I went back and I have an MSW and a PhD in social work in between. And so I say that just because a lot of the work I do around forensics and experts and the change in court systems and child protection and all that stuff was always part of the practice. The Academy's journal, is
Mhm.
just a great group of lawyers, and like everything, things are going through transitions. We've got all the new issues, planned and coming out, and So I expect I will still attend meetings, work on the journal. And I mean this really, you know, the Academy, like every organization, had to make a transition to getting a lot of younger fellows. And the criteria for being a fellow is different than when I joined. Back then on the application, there were all these white spaces that you had to fill in with all your trials. And if you didn't fill them in, you felt bad. Today, if you actually filled them all in, nobody would think you were a good lawyer
Right.
because you couldn't mediate or settle, or you had other personality disorders.
Yeah, that
So
civility is dead, right?
I think one of the things, in answer to your question for the Academy, and my observation of it is, you know, there's some transitions ahead for this generation of lawyers as to what it means to be a trial lawyer, all the skill sets for ADR and mediation and referees, how to do child custody cases and change the adversarial system. To me, that's the next really big challenge for the Academy, is that the public doesn't want an adversarial system. They want a menu of ways of doing better for their kids and families. And I think those structural changes for the Academy are going to be a real challenge. And so I hope that in some way I'm around long enough to help with that if it's available. But I know that I do see that as the next challenge for the Academy, that shift to a younger generation of lawyers, but also assisting with the structural changes that the family court system really needs. And I think that's, I'm really looking forward to watching that.
That's incredible.
And
Well,
perhaps adding a little bit on the edges occasionally when I can.
well, how could it be any other way, right? Well, I'm so thankful. I know everybody will be when they see the video. So grateful that you took the time to talk to and share with everyone who you are, why you're a part of the Academy, and look forward to seeing you in person at the November meeting.
I do, and thank you. It was very kind of you to ask, and I do. I look forward to seeing you and meeting all of the other folks at the meeting. I just think everybody really wants November to get pulled off. Jill's an extraordinary executive director, and the team there in Chicago, but they've had a busy year.
Right. Tough
So
road ahead.
That's the executive committee. Everybody's got a lot of work to do, but I think we're in good shape to get everybody together in Chicago in November. So that's going to be a blast.
Agreed. Well, you take care.
You too.
Have a wonderful
Thank
weekend.
you for inviting me, and have a good day, and keep track of the earbuds. Mark them.
Oh, right. I'll make sure my mom keeps hers and doesn't take mine. Take care,
It's always
Dana.
Mom. Thank you. It's nice to meet you.